Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Mr. Lipsy. You kind of took me down memory lane a little bit when you started talking about where I grew up at. So thanks for the smile, brother, and the introduction. I want to thank Mr. Davis and also Sherry for giving me the opportunity to share what's going on in the Baton Rouge Police Department. And the title of my presentation today is Policing During a Pandemic. And I thought it was important that we talk about not only the current state of what we're going through, but 2020 and its impact on policing. So with the short time that's made available to me, we're going to go ahead on and get started because I have a lot to cover in such a short period of time. So first, when I came before Rotary, when I was first blessed with this position, that was back in 2018, I talked about this 6-point high strategy to reduce crime in Baton Rouge. And it focused on that small group of individuals that are responsible for crime. I believe that there's a small group, just like in other cities, that are responsible for violent crime in our committee. Now we're going to have a mission-focused approach to addressing that. Placing more officers on the streets, filling those vacancies, improving community police relations, cultivating integrity and accountability, a plan for technology and equipment, and listening to key audience and developing relationships. So that's what we started out to do when my team and I began to put those strategies together. A part of that included working with our state and federal local law enforcement agencies and our district attorney's office and his crime strategy unit, where they provide analytical support to us, not only so we can share intelligence, but also not only identify strategies, but those small group of individuals that are responsible for gun violence and group violence. And we had success in that as we began that approach. Not just us, we relied on consultants and experts from around the country as part of our National Public Safety Partnership Initiative to take a problem-oriented approach, policing approach to helping reduce crime in the city of Baton Rouge. Then we looked at internally, right? We had 21 police officers that were working in specialized divisions or in administrative positions, and repurposed those assets to have more boots on the ground, and then continuing to grow our human capital, filling those vacancies. That's been a challenge for law enforcement nationally. And we're going to kind of talk about what are the challenges with law enforcement with filling those vacancies. That's not unique to the Baton Rouge Police Departments. Our peer agencies and other law enforcement in the area find themselves with more vacancies than they usually had. That's why it was important for us to try to get a raise for our police officers to help with that. And I want to thank our mayor and our city council for leading in that effort and helping us get a raise in the midst of a pandemic. And I think that's very important that we recognize the raise isn't where we should be, but it is a step in the right direction. And even with the economic hardship that we're in right now, to get that says a lot. There are some police departments that are on furlough, some who are not getting merit increases. So to have the support of our mayor and city council, understanding that our police officers deserve a pay raise, says a lot. So we're continuing with those efforts. We've had 3 basic training academies and 3 post academies over the past couple of years to help get those numbers up. And an officer wellness program. We established that in 2019, a full-time person, peer-to-peer support for our police officers, because we understand the stress that they deal with on a daily basis. So we're trying to change the environment where police officers feel safe to say, I need a timeout, and to change that negative stigma when it comes to mental health, because our police officers experience the same stress that others receive. So creating that environment where they feel safe was important. And then improving community police relations. We set out to do that. Our community service events, over 300 plus events, 2018 and 2019. Our Explorer program, where we actually are working with young people in our community, getting them interested in careers as first responders, creating cadet positions where we can hire them early before they and once they become the right age, we then put them in a police academy. So all of those things have been working with us, building those partnerships with our community partners like the Butterfly Society, Iris, 100 Black Men Change, NAACP, so many others that we have been working with in the community to improve those community police relations, but also internally cultivating integrity of accountability. You know, the mayor made it clear that the 21st century policing that was put out many years ago provided the framework on what good policing looks like. So we started that. We have one of the best body camera programs in the country. We exceed the federal government's recommendations on that, and we're continuing to move forward with building that program out and meeting community expectations. But it planned for technology and equipment. You know, we're using analytics and technology to just be smarter on how we police, not only in helping identify that 6%, but also being more strategic in how we use the resources that we currently have. So there's a lot of data that we're putting out there. We've been fortunate for the first time. The sheriff's office, the police department, and other first responders are on the same CAD system. We are also on the same records management system, not only with us, but the district attorney's office is using the same vendor as well. So what does that mean for you? For the first time, all of the data that we have, the data that the sheriff's office have, other first responding agencies, and the district attorney's office will all be on the same system, and we will be able to analyze that data and share data electronically in ways that we've never done before. That brings about efficiency and also helping us do a better job in identifying who those bad actors are in the community. So we're using all of that through our real-time crime center. You heard us talk about that. We're staffing that up. We still got 100% staff. We have to hire some more analysts. But I always say this, LSU has an analyst for every team they play against. So we believe when it comes to crime, we need to at least meet that level where we have analysts that specialize in every type of crime to help support our police officers out there so we can be more efficient and smarter how we do business. But one of the things that I talked about was the listening to key audiences and developing relationships. You know, relationships are so important in policing. We are in the people business. And that's what it is. We started our Chief Advisory Council where we have representation from the community, not only organization, but community leaders. Our 3 higher education institutions have representation there. But what happens in those meetings is we have conversations about changes in the department, about policies. And I've seen where policies were changed from conversations that happened at our Chief Advisory Council meeting, from increasing the number of audits on body cameras to addressing our K9, making it mandatory that they also turn on their cameras. So there are many things that came out of those meetings that are better for law enforcement and doesn't compromise officer safety. And I think that's key when you don't compromise officer safety and you're able to change policies that are for the betterment of the community. And that happened in community district meetings that our mayor helped lead the effort with that at all our districts, where we actually actively listening to community concerns. So what happened in those few years? This is what happened from 2017 to 2019. We saw about a 20%, 19.73% increase in calls for service. We saw property crime dropping right around 23% from 2017 to 2019. So we believe that we were moving in that right direction to continue seeing decreases in crime. And I can tell you as a student of leadership who reads and talk to my peers, we believe we were on the right direction. If you look at here, we saw a slight uptick in calls for service in 2020, about a 6.6% decrease from 2017 to 2020, but right at about a 0.72 in 2020 in calls for service. But so all of the work that we were doing that I came before this very body and talked about, there was change ahead. And I can tell you, you know, with all of the change, sometimes we say leaders see things others don't see, and we see it before others see it. But I can tell you, after talking with my counterparts around the country, nobody saw this coming. Nobody. And we didn't realize the impact that this was going to have on policing. So here's some of the things that the pandemic presented, are the challenges. We had a disruption in our drug trade. We saw some escalating turf wars. between those who are involved in drugs. We saw increases in overdoses. We've had more overdoses with fentanyl and heroin and the opioid epidemic that we were already going through and saw increase in previous years. Those increases jumped more than we thought it would because of some of the challenges that the pandemic presented. Look, it interrupted systems, programs, services, and our normalcy. Churches, we were not having churches, schools, extracurricular activities, parks, playgrounds, group support sessions for someone who's suffering from either mental illness or that monster called addiction, counseling, community events, that 300 plus that we held in 2018 and 2019, we were not able to facilitate those in 2020. The court systems were interrupted, libraries were interrupted, and all of that presented anxiety, depression, economic hardship with business closing, more people spending time at home. Some of our young community were having what we call these pop-up parties or large gatherings in the midst of the pandemic. And what we had to do, we had to make some changes at law enforcement, as law enforcement officers. Our officers and their families were also put at risk through interaction. So we started our telephone reporting unit where you can call in and we can take phone calls over the phone as opposed to in person, non-emergency calls, social distance and mask compliance. Look, there's a balance. Enforcement versus responsible citizens. Our businesses have been stepping up to the plate and our citizens, so we don't have to use enforcement because the education and awareness that have been pushed by our mayor's office and our governor has really been paying off. Is there work that needs to be done? Absolutely. But we still want to commend those who are being very responsible out there. We can no longer book anyone into jail for misdemeanor offenses because the sheriff was also doing his part so that this virus wouldn't spread in the prisons. So we were not booking for misdemeanors, and we saw more daytime shootings, more female victims, and a closer relationship between suspects and victims. And we saw some increases in some group violence. So here's what happened. Domestic violence increased right around 22%. Since 2019, we saw victims trapped in the houses with their abusers. Right around 47% of our homicides happen either inside of a house or in the front yard. So we start seeing this different data due to the pandemic or in association with the pandemic. And then what happened? There was more change down the road. There was more change. This change was a little different. So in the midst of a pandemic, we had the George Floyd incident. And we began to see civil unrest and criticism of law enforcement all over the world. No, it did not happen here, but it made its way to every community in America. And there were morale issues and the protests and the civil unrest that we were seeing other places. We didn't experience that here. So the question is why? And I believe from the short time that I've been here, it's because we had already began implementing many of the reforms that are being advocated around the country. That work had already started and the collective healing in this community began. Some of the individuals who protested in the past are now standing side by side with us at press conferences. We have relationships now. So our protests here were peaceful. We didn't have any civil unrest. And I really believe that's because the work had already been done and began when Mayor President Brum took over. And she highlighted the importance of building trust and legitimacy. When we look at one of the questions that is asked most by law enforcement leaders like myself, what do they need help with? The number one question, building trust and legitimacy in the community. And how did we do that? How we were able to accomplish that in Baton Rouge? We did it through transparency. I talked about our body camera program, social media. We're trying to put out more information. We're still working on that. We're putting our policies online now to make it easy, accessible. Online complaint system where you can actually file complaints, pushing data out there to make more information available to the public. and policy changes and oversight from use of force policy, our early intervention system, no chokeholds, duty, to intervene, as well as addressing our canine policy and how they interact with juveniles, verbal warnings required, and looking at our vehicle stops. We are consistently and constantly looking at our policy because we work in this ever-changing environment. Training and education was another piece. We instituted procedural justice training, and that training is so important for us to understand the communities that we serve. We're now moving forward with a community training piece, a module that will be part of that, where we're actually making it mandatory for all of our officers to go through. And community conversation at the academy. When our young police officers are going through their training, we actually have community members that come in and talk to them about expectations. So here's what happened in 2020. We saw increases in homicides. We saw some increases in assaults. We also saw robberies down right around 20%, 29, almost 30%, and 15%. So these are what we call our UCR data, the numbers that we have to report to the federal government. And here are the final numbers for 2020. We have an overall decrease of 7.63% in crime for the year 2020. Property crime, we have a 9.5 decrease, and violent crime was up 1.01%. We had around, it's right around 31 incidents more in 2020 as opposed to 2019. So 7.63. We can do better, Baton Rouge. But here's where we're at in 2020. We're going to continue with our strategy to reduce crime. We have to fill these vacancies. That's important. We're still working with the administration to find dollars within our current budget to see how we can continue getting step increases for our police officers. We're going to continue supporting that telephone reporting unit to help our police officers out with non-emergency calls for services. We're going to continue our data-driven approach where we're actually pushing data out there to service providers, specific data in communities to help prevent crime from happening. Intelligence-led policing, coordinating with our federal and state partners. We are assigning police officers. We already have, and we're filling vacancies on federal task forces. But these are two I want to end with that I'm really, really excited about, because you want to know what's different than prior years. These are two things that stand out to me the most. One, the Mayor's Safe, Hopeful, and Healthy initiative. This approach takes a community-based approach to addressing crime. Look, you can't talk about crime without education, without mental health, without economics, without workforce. All of those things and family values are tied into that initiative and are designed at the community grassroots level to stop these issues before crime happens. So it's a preventive approach. So I'm excited about that with the street teams. They're actually online right now, and I don't have it in front of me, but I'll make sure I get that out to you on how you can go in line and get involved and get engaged. But the Bridge Center for Hope opened its doors. I'm excited about this. The first 4 days, we had 27 people in our community who were either suffering from mental health or some addiction who actually went through the doors in the first 4 days of the Bridge Center for Hope. And 11 of those were voluntary. This is a game changer in terms of how we interact with those individuals who are suffering from a mental health crisis or have a mental health issue. Look, we are dropping them off. 3.5 minutes was the turnaround. So that police officer now can drop a person off who has a mental health crisis, and he's back on the road in less than 4 minutes. In the past, that will take hours, and they're actually dealing with the issues. I am excited about that program. I think it's going to have some long-term positive impacts on crime. So that was the overview of what happened in 2020. And I want to conclude with this right here. I would like to address the elephant in the room called police reform. And I would like to address this issue in a way and present it in the same questions that's presented in the 30,000 diverse Rotary clubs all around the world. The litmus tests that guides your decisions, the four-way test. And when we examine the first question, Rotary, I ask you to think about it. Think about the integrity of the social media. I want you to think about the integrity of social media. I want you to think about our last election, what happened at our U.S. Capitol, the irresponsible journalism on both sides, misinformation. And I want you to think about how all that impacts our ability to do our job as law enforcement officers. Our lives becoming the normal. Shouldn't the truth matter? Integrity is essential in our profession. And there's no place for lies or misinformation in policing. So the answer to the question is yes, police reform is the truth. And when we look at the second question, is it fair to all concerned? What's right is always fair. The truth is always best for all concerned parties, no matter how hard it may be at times or the liabilities that the truth may expose. It's always fair. And the truth is always worth it. Integrity and transparency is fair to all concerned. And the third question, will it build goodwill to better friendships? One of the reasons that we are in this current environment in policing in America is in part due to our failure to acknowledge, accept, and address our past, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we didn't have to wait on the death of George Floyd to do the right thing. Police officers and police chiefs immediately condemned what we saw on that video. But we have to look at our profession, look at ourselves in the mirror and say we can grow through this. We can do better because we are better. And we have to have those uncomfortable conversations. We have to have those conversations because they bring about change, understanding, and healing in communities all across America. That fosters better relationships and that builds friendships with the communities we serve. You know, Rotary, in your business, in the business community, you work in an ever-changing environment. So I ask if you just take a moment, just a few seconds, and I just want you to think back when you first started your profession, when you first got your job, or when you first opened your business. I want you to think back. Do you remember that time? You remember the challenges over the years? George Bell, you remember when you first started working over there at United Way? Or Mr. Lipsy, when you first started your business? I want you to think about that. Think about where you were and where you are. Think about the struggles, the changes made along the way, the accomplishments, the wins. Wow. Look at all that reform. See, reform simply means to improve, to change for the better, to amend what is wrong or unsatisfactory. That's development. That's advancement. And Rotary, when we speak of these words in the business, it's accepted, it's encouraged, it's embraced, and welcomed with open arms. But when we speak of those same terms in law enforcement, it's frowned upon. Why? Why does it take on this negative connotation when we speak of those terms when we refer to policing? Why? When you hear about reform efforts at the federal level, at the state level, when you hear about change right here in our Baton Rouge Police Department, please don't get angry. Don't spread negative words. Rotary, we too work in an ever-changing environment. The change is necessary and it's inevitable. And I would like to close with that final question. Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And since we are in Black History Month, I believe it's appropriate to answer that question with a question. And that question is, Rotary, and how are the children? And how are the children, Rotary? That expression is a traditional greeting in some African countries, and it implies that the true strength of a people is determined by the well-being of their children. See, people think about things a little different when we put our kids first. Rotary, our kids deserve better. Yes, I am your chief of police, but I am also a father. So when you think about Baton Rouge, I ask you, Rotary, and how are the children? Police reform is good for our children, and it's beneficial to all concerned. God bless you, and thank you for listening to my heart this afternoon.